And then we go around, and it's kind of like a graphic organizer. It's really cool. And we staple them together, and it creates like this little booklet of like flaps. So usually what we do is we have them write the essential question here. So I won't write it all out because I'm sure you don't want to sit through 30 people's of lessons of like all of these lesson plans. So I'll just write EQ at the very top and have the essential question, and then the flap below we'll use later on in the lesson, and I'll show you what we do with that. So once I say the essential question, it's how do the laws created by the government affect me? We'll start to talk about like kind of get an idea of like what they think that is, and we'll talk it through. And then I'm actually going to bring up a picture of the Constitution, and I'm going to show you right like in 2 seconds if I go to the right thing. Okay, there we go. So I have this at, I can't turn it around. I have this at archives.gov. It's a picture of the Constitution, and we'll actually go through, there's kind of like a dumbed down version of it because obviously I don't think children will be able to read the actual Constitution, and we'll go through the first couple of amendments and kind of get an idea of how this was the first law of the land, and how it kind of is like the reason for all of the laws that we have. It's, you know, it's the government and everything like that. And obviously, even those aren't necessarily our local laws, we still abide by them today. And I'll explain how it's the law of the land. And of course, I just got rid of my lesson plan. Oh, there we go. Okay, so we'll look at that, and I'll ask if anyone knows what it is. I'll have students do a turn and talk about what they think it is, and then explain how this document was first established as America's founding laws. And we'll go over how it was written in 1789 and how long ago that was. And obviously I don't need them to remember that date, but you know, it's always good to spit it out there. And then list some key rights of citizens. And I want to kind of go from like the big government, and then I'll kind of break it down for them and how like the big government like affects their living, even though, you know, they don't live up in Washington or anything. So some of the rights of citizens, I'll have them do a turn and talk about that and what they think that means. And then I'll explain how the freedom of religion, freedom of speech, those are all rights that we have as American citizens. And then ask if they can think of anything else. And then I'll have them take a look at the Constitution with the laptop attached at the Elmo and show students how each section is a different law of the land. And then we'll point out actually Article 2, Section 1, and I'll read that it says, again, we're like the dumbed down version of it. The executive power shall be vested in a President of the United States of America. He shall hold his office during the term of 4 years. And I'll explain this was a law that was set into the Constitution a long time ago to abide by, and why it's important that we still abide by these laws, because if every president stayed as long as he wanted, that wouldn't be very fair, one, to everybody else, and two, the people who didn't necessarily want him to be president. And how this was important also because this originated because presidents can only serve 2 terms in office. It seemed an effective way to invalidate Roosevelt's legacy, which I don't know if I'll actually mention that or not, or maybe kind of explain to them what that means. And then I'll ask students to create the graphic organizer. Of course, they would have already done this. And I'll model it for them, of course, because even though they're in 4th grade, which this is a 4th grade lesson plan, you know, sometimes they need help, especially accommodations with my lower learners or people who might not know how to do it very well. And then I'll walk around with a stapler. So we'll split the room into 4 parts. And then within my lesson plan, you can see that I actually wrote down who needs to be with who, and then some people can't be together, and then everyone else, it doesn't really matter. And then I'll tell each groups to collaborate and research on different laws. And before we do that, I'll have them go to icivics.gov, and then they'll add why it's important to abide by these laws for safety reasons, good citizenship, etc. And then they'll go to the iCivics for research help. And then I'll also, depending on what each law students can think of, I can help them research other forms. For instance, I'll do the first one for them just so they get an idea of what to do, because again, it's always important to model for your students. So I thought of speeding laws in Florida. So what I would do is I literally just Google searched, and of course I would have to help them do that to find an appropriate web page for them. But this is drivinglaws.org, and it actually has like information that you can find. And apparently a lot of people go here when they do speed. It says speeding laws in Florida, and then it gives information on penalties for excessive speeding, penalties for reckless driving, what the speed limits are on most of these laws, and then other Florida speeding laws, and a point system. So what they'll do is they need to at least have four different forms of information that they need to fill out on each one of their things. So how they'll do that, and of course I won't have them use a marker, but that's all I could find, is we would write each group, and of course there's 4 of them, so they would think of 4 different ones. Each group would fill out right there, it would say speeding, and on the flap underneath it, okay, hold on, I gotta put my marker down. Okay, so like this, and then on the flap underneath it, this is where they'll write all their information on speeding. And then again, we'll have a lot more pages, but I just could find 4. So, and then I'll explain to them how you could write something like your first time violation, you would pay between $25 and $250. Penalty for reckless driving, you could be sentenced to jail time. And then speed limits, for instance, 70 miles per hour on limited access highways. And then, of course, just make sure that they know what they're writing down. If it doesn't make sense, either ask somebody or write down information that doesn't make sense to you. Because when you get into the laws, a lot of this doesn't make sense. For kids, at least. So that's what they will do. And then let me go back to my lesson plan. Okay. And then once they write down that information, like the actual laws and like stipulates that go within the laws, each group must find their law and collaborate as to why this particular law is important and abide by. For instance, I would say, and I would write down, again, model for them, it's important to not speed, because when speeding, you become reckless and you can't pay attention to what you're doing. People aren't going as fast as you. They might not see you coming. You could wreck. There's so many reasons why you shouldn't be speeding anyways. Students playing or kids playing in the streets. There's a million things why you should abide by these laws. And then when each group is finished, they'll be presenting their findings to the class. And then because there are so many of these, even though each group is responsible for their own law, they'll then turn and they'll be writing down what the other groups are presenting. So speeding, and then another one could be, paying taxes, or, whatever they decide, whatever they choose. And then again, they can go to icivics.gov for more information on like different laws that they could research to get ideas. And they need to explain how the laws affect each individual, explain the need for laws, identify ways in which abiding by this law is showing good citizenship, identifying actions of citizens that demonstrate civility, and explain the need for the government to create this law. And by defining each one of those, they're also hitting all of the standards that I've pulled as well. And of course, I structured those questions around the standards to make sure that they do hit those. And that will actually be their summative assessment for this. Will be to turn this in and make sure that they have all the information and they understand it. And then another like informal assessment. I was going to have them create a Wordle. I'll pull up Wordle.com, and each student will come up and just put in like one word that they thought of when they were doing this lesson, like speeding or constitution or government or whatever, and then we'll create a Wordle and print it out and hang it up as a kind of like a show it. So if a student masters the content quickly, and I actually thought, because I don't personally think it's fair that kids who always get things done quickly get to do things that other kids don't, because that's not fair. So I thought the next day to kind of extend on this, under iCivics, there's a game called Lawcraft. This is actually where you make your own laws and they can play against each other. And they hit different targets, like creating their own laws. They have to argue why the law is important. What were some other things that it had? If you make a good argument, your law can pass, or your bill can pass as a law. So that could be like a fun game to kind of add on to the lesson the next day in social studies, and it kind of extends on their thinking. So, but the kids who get to finish early will be able to go ahead and start that early. So, where was the next one? Okay, so meeting your students' needs. I will be meeting my students' needs. It says, if applicable, how does this lesson connect to the interest and cultural backgrounds? Obviously, the cultural backgrounds lesson connects because of talking about the classroom rules and engage them in the beginning of the lesson so they sense this is something they all took part in creating at the beginning of the year. I'll point out that, most of the time teachers, especially myself, will create like the classroom rules, and how our classroom rules are an extent of rules and laws that could be, that basically no matter where you go, you have rules and you have laws, whether it's the government's constitution, like the overall law of the land, or it's your state's laws or your classroom rules. They all should apply. And then connecting a cultural background, because no matter where they're from, you have rules and you have laws. And even though our laws might not be the same if someone who's coming from Italy or whatever, it could be interesting to them to see what kind of laws we have, and they might not even be familiar with the laws that they had in their country before, especially if they're in 4th grade. They're probably unaware of the laws. And it reflects the local community, because the laws we'll be covering are directly related to not only the community and the state, but in some cases the federal government. And then I'll be differentiating instruction for students who need additional enrichment as well, by looking over the lead lesson in iCivics.org. That's the one that I told you that they could go ahead and, I'll do the fun game the next day, but this lesson is actually like an enrichment lesson for children. This task gives students a chance to be present for a day in which they will be able to look through different policies and decide whether it's a good policy or not. So that'll be kind of fun for them. And then I think I went over everything else. And of course, like I said, I'll either be sure, as a responsible teacher, you either need to make sure that you do have those 4 laptops, whether it's a laptop cart, or you need to, make yourself available to sign up for the computer lab. Most of the time, teachers in schools do have access to these things, and I'm kind of structured my lesson around assuming that I would have access to this. And then my objectives. By doing all of this, students will be able to explain how the different laws affect the individuals, explain the need for laws, identify ways in which abiding by the laws is showing good citizenship, and explain the need for government to create laws. And then my rationale, I'm teaching the lesson to inform my students of the importance of civility. This lesson fits within a larger lesson plan, because it's establishment of the government, how it's power and people, and identify the different levels of government. I think either the next one or the next two NCSS standards are actually how bills become laws, and then the 3 branches of government. So this kind of gives them like a baseline of, or at least the terminology of it. I'm teaching this way to expand their knowledge of content by exploring the Constitution and laws within a group setting. This way of student-centered learning will optimize student learning. I think anytime you can get kids to do their own research, it's really great for them. So I always like incorporating that. It's important for students to learn this concept so they learn at an early age ways they can become good citizens. And then I'll know that they have I know they will have mastered this if they can at least get a 70% accuracy on this. They're able to pull all the information that I have, and then of course I'll have like a rubric for them with all of the guiding questions on there of things that they need to answer for their laws. So my teaching methods are direct instruction, guided release, and partner collaboration. And the misconceptions that I had, I think there's a lot of misconceptions here. They might not understand why we have the laws we do, how they're created, and other things like that. I think I'm going to have to use our guided discussions to kind of capture their misguided misconceptions in